Hey, November 2025 IB Business Management students, I hope you're doing well. We know some of you may be anxious with only less than 2 months left until you start your IB exam and how to best prepare yourself as you begin your study leave very soon. With your BM Paper 1 exam coming up on October the 29th, we've made this video to support and guide you through as you prepare for your Paper 1 pre-release statement on the company Walkway Ltd. So let's get started. Now, to give everyone a quick overview of what Paper 1 is all about, this is a 1 hour and 30-minute examination, okay? And you'll be writing this on October the 29th. Okay, so that's when your exam is for this year. This exam will be written by both higher level and standard level students. Okay, so in other words, that this means if you're an HL student, you can expect that only the SL content of the course will be tested. Okay, so SL content only. Okay, so that means if you're the HL student, you can have a bit more focus on the content that you should be studying in preparation for paper one and the types of questions that you might get with Walkway Limited as your case study. The pre-release statement might make reference to some of the higher level related content. You might think you might think that you might get a HL related question, but the IB syllabus is very clear that in paper one, this is a common paper for both the higher level and standard level students. So it's only an SL content driven paper. So as an HL student, you do not need to apply any of the HL content you have learned in the course in paper one in order to succeed and do well. But of course, if you did include it, you won't be penalized for it because as long as you've used the content, the HL content appropriately and correctly, the IB applies something called positive marking. So ultimately, there's no need and no expectation for you as a higher level student to include higher level content within your responses. Another important thing to note that even though this exam is only 1 hour and 30 minutes, the IB has made an important change in how they will run exams that are less than 2 hours. So according to the IB, all exams with a duration of less than 2 hours, the students or the candidates will need to remain supervised until the 2 hour mark has been reached. So that means your IB exam invigilators and your DP coordinators at your school will ensure that despite the fact that this paper one is only 1 hour and 30 minutes, okay, you can only leave the exam hall or the exam classroom that you're at, okay, after the 2 hour mark. Okay. And for those of you who are, waiting to write paper three, because paper three for the higher level students happens immediately after your paper one, okay, you might want to use that 30-minute as like a break, okay, or just to prepare yourself mentally for the next examination. Now, in terms of the weighting of the exam, for the standard level student, this is worth 35%. And for the higher level students, paper one is worth 25%. The weighting is lower for higher level student. It's because you will need to write your paper three on the same day on October the 29th. Okay, and you might notice that under the instructions section for paper one, you are told that the IB formula sheet will not be provided, but you are permitted access to a GDC or an IB approved scientific calculator. Okay, so the formula sheet is not provided. So this is quite important and what you need to know as a student preparing for the paper one exam, because this means that you can expect that you might need to perform some basic quantitative calculations, even though you don't get the formula sheet. So there's many quantitative calculations that you've learned throughout this course, which is not in the formula sheet. So for example, how to calculate total profit, how to calculate, for example, total revenue, okay, or even break-even calculation, for example, the formula to calculate break-even quantity. These are all calculations that do not have a formula on the formula sheet, okay, but you are still expected to be able to calculate them without this formula sheet that's given to you, that's not given to you in paper one. All right. Other things that you might have to apply from a quantitative perspective could be things such as decision trees or even cash flow calculations. So while all of these topics are quantitative in nature, these are also, like I said, formula that you will need to know how to use, but they're not in the IB BM formula sheet in any way. Okay. Similarly, for topics which have formula that are in the BM formula sheet, such as investment appraisal methods, like payback period, ARR, ratio analysis, it's unlikely that you will be expected to calculate these calculations because they do show up on the BM formula sheet. And the fact that you don't have the formula sheet for paper one exam could be sort of a little bit of a hint as to what types of question you might get, okay, in paper one. Okay, but this does not rule out the possibility that the IB could present you with a table with, let's say, profitability and or liquidity ratios that are calculated for you already. So they might have these information that's calculated, so you don't need the formula sheet to calculate it, but you need to be able to interpret and understand, the trends and also the interpretation and understanding of the company's financial situation based on these ratios that they have given and calculated for you in the case study. Okay, so in this case, just remember that you could still be expected to interpret and analyze these racial results given the case study information. So what this means is that paper one is going to be largely qualitative, okay, for all of you. But do expect that there can be some quantitative questions in the exam because you are allowed access to a scientific calculator or the GDC, okay, that is permitted by the IB. All right. And as an IB student, we do know that you will be studying hard for your examination. And at Diplomaly, our aim is to support and equip our students with the strategies to study smart and to help you get the most out of this course. And to help you, obviously, to maximize your chances of success in getting a level 6 or a level 7 in this IB examination. So let's talk a little bit more about the two sections that are within paper one. So we have section A, okay, in paper one, and section A is worth a total of 20 marks. Okay, now what exactly is within section A? So section A, you're going to see a series of, 2 marker, 4 marker, and also 6 marker questions, ranging from assessment objectives from AO1 all the way to AO2. Okay, so these are the types of questions that you can expect. You are expected to answer all of these questions within section A, so there's no choice for you. You must answer them, all of them that you're given. Most of these questions are going to be more qualitative in nature. Okay, there could be a chance where you might get maybe 1 or 2 quantitative questions based on things that I've said earlier, such as maybe performing simple calculations related to cost, revenue, profit, break even, contributions, okay, or even some minor cash flow calculations, such as calculating, cash inflow or cash outflow, provided that you're given, a cash flow forecast for the business. Okay. And as mentioned, you can get a combination of 2, 4, and 6 marker questions in section A. And again, the very, very important thing that you want to make sure and you remember is that only SL content will be tested. There will not be any HL content. So for the HL students, okay, this pretty much rules out any of the HL extensions within the 5 units that you've learned in this course, and also the HL BMTs that you have learned as part of the business management syllabus. All right. Now, within section B, however, you'll see that section B, this is only worth a total of 10 marks. Now, the only difference between section A and section B is that in section B, you do have a choice, okay? You answer only one out of the 2 questions that are given to you in this section. So please do not answer all of them because you don't have both questions, because you do not have the time to answer both questions, because both of these questions are going to be at the 10 marker level. So that means it will be an AO3 style question. Okay. So we get two 10 marker questions where you get a choice between the two and you can choose which one you want to write. Okay. As your response for paper one. So what I would strongly advise you to do is that once you get the 5-minute reading time during the first 5 minutes of the exam, I would immediately flip to the question first and look at section B and take a look at both of the 10 marker question and see which one is sort of something that you're more comfortable with. Okay, read the question first and then read the case study, because then you can then, as you're reading the case study, you can start to find information and case study information that might help you answer your choice of the 10 marker question within section B. Right? And another thing to point out is that don't forget, as you are looking into writing a 10 marker response, okay, the 10 marker response in paper one is marked the same way as the 10 marker response in paper two, where you do have a rubric, and the rubric expects you to demonstrate a wide range of use of business management tools and theories that are relevant to your discussion. So, one thing to point out is that it is not, okay, about the quantity of tools or theory. It's about the quality. Okay. So quality of the tool and the relevance of the tools is actually more important. Okay. When it comes to looking at, the responses for your 10 marker response in this examination. So let's deep dive into this pre-release statement. This pre-release statement should have shared to you by the IB, and to also your teachers in the earlier months of August, and your teacher at school should have already given you a copy of this. The pre-release statement is approximately 200 words. Okay. And on October the 29th, which is the day you'll write your paper one exam, you will see the remainder of this case study, which is probably going to be around 800 words in total. So that means that in total, the case study should be approximately around 1,000 words, okay, or so, give or take. So in terms of the numbers of pages for the case itself, if we take reference from the May 2025 examination, you're looking at around 2 full pages of text, which might exclude any diagrams, images, or tables that are embedded within the case study. So that might make it a little bit longer than 2 pages, but in short, the whole thing should be around 2 full pages of text that you're looking at. Okay. So I would expect the same for you this year in the November 2025 examinations for this case study on Walkway Limited. Now, you should have annotated the pre-release statement with your teachers at school already, but if you haven't, don't worry. We'll take some time now to go through this together so you have a good idea on what you should be looking for in the case study. So if we take a look at, this case study right now, it's not long, right? There's only 200 words. So what we need to do is we need to try to get the most out of these 200 words and see if we can relate it to as many topics that you've learned already in the business management course, and also to identify any key business management terminology that could possibly lead to, let's say, an AO1 definition question that is worth 2 marks for you in your upcoming paper one. Okay. One more thing to also point out is that as the IB transitions to a 2 different time zone paper, it is possible that you might get 2 time zone papers this year for your November examination. This is certainly the case in the in the May examination, where there are 2 different time zone papers for the May exam session. And what we've noticed is that with the May 2025 examination session, most of the questions in section A, so just going back to what I said earlier, section A, you are asked to answer all of the questions. It's worth 20 marks in total. The time zone 1 paper and the time zone 2 paper, there are different types of questions, 2 markers and 4 markers in section A. Whereas in section B, what we notice is that the question were the same, okay, for section B. So just that's something to think about as you are preparing for the examination. So let's take a look at the case study right now. So the first sentence, in 2020, Nikita Otino, a university engineering graduate in country Y, set up Walkway Limited as a privately held company. Nikita was a sole shareholder. So what this means is that this company has been in operation for around 5 years or so, right? It is created by an individual called Nikita, sorry. Okay, and the company is called Walkway Limited. Now, the key thing you want to point out here is that there is a key business terminology, privately held company. Okay, now as you're looking at this terminology, a couple of things that you want to start brainstorming. Okay, number one, it could be an AO1 question that asks you to define. So make sure that as you're preparing for this examination, if you're writing, let's say, notes for yourself, I would make sure that you have this terminology defined. So some of the key things that you want to recall with privately held company is it is a type of for-profit business entity. right? Not only is a for-profit business entity, it's a type of business entity where shares are only sold to close friends and families, okay? And that also means that the shareholders within the company have full control of it, okay? And if they want to sell any shares to any other people, they have to get the agreement of everyone, all the shareholders within the privately held company. And one possible drawback when it comes to privately held company is that there is limited sources of finance because the funds are only raised within the people who you've sold the shares to, which are your family and friends. Okay. And then you could think about also the pros and cons. This would be relevant for your AO2 questions. So the pros and cons of privately held. Okay. So what are some examples of these pros and cons? Obviously, the pros would be, like I said, you have greater control over it because there is only limited shareholders, okay, which are limited by the family and friends that you have sold shares to. Okay, another good thing about this is you enjoy something called financial privacy. Okay, because this type of business entity, they do not need to disclose any of their financial statements to the public, unlike the publicly held company. But obviously, the drawback with this is that you have limited SOF, okay, limited sources of finance, okay, for example. So that's something that you need to think about. So immediately you can start brainstorming possible questions that could be asked, okay. You might be asked to define, you know, privately held, okay. You might be asked to describe features, okay, of privately held, okay. That these would be obviously the 2 mark questions. You might also be asked to explain the pros or the advantages and disadvantages of operating as a privately held company for Nikita. Okay, this would be a 4 mark question. All right. Now, in the second sentence, it says that Nikita was a sole shareholder. So, in other words, as a sole shareholder, okay, that means she has full control. Okay? And in other words, she is the entrepreneur. Okay. Now, although the word entrepreneur, okay, is not showing up in the pre-release statement right now, but I would also advise you to make sure that you are able to define what entrepreneur is. Okay, you might also want to make sure that you know the features, okay, of what an entrepreneur entails. Okay, and you might also want to think about, reasons why maybe perhaps Nikita wanted to start the business. Okay. This would be a Unit 1.1 topic. So just make sure that you go back to Unit 1.1, which is the first topic in the business management course. Okay, so you do need to think a little bit more deeply in terms of the possible aspects or things that could be asked. Okay? The fact that she is a sole shareholder, the word shareholder itself is also a key business term. So you might also want to know that you are able to define shareholder, okay, what it is as a 2 mark question. And as you know, shareholder, okay, this would be a type of external, okay, stakeholders. Okay? Okay, because as a shareholder, even though Nikita is the owner and operating the business, okay, one thing you need to remember is that Nikita, okay, if let's say Walkway Limited does encounter any financial issues or they get sued, right, she is protected by something called limited liability. Okay, as a privately held company, it is a limited liability company. Okay, that means that there is something called separate legal entity. So in other words, Nikita will only lose out, Nikita will not lose out on any of her personal assets if Walkway Limited is being sued or they get into financial debt or trouble, which might force it to go bankrupt. Okay, because there's a separate legal entity for Nikita, okay, as a sole shareholder of this business organization, which has gone through a process of incorporation, okay, where they're able to obtain that limited liability status. All right. Now, taking a look at the second paragraph, okay, it says that Nikita designed floor tiles that, when walked on, it generates electricity. The greater the footfall, the greater the electricity generated. One thing to point out is that footfall is one of the key words that they have listed in your In your case study this year, you'll see that there are a couple of key additional terminologies on page 2 of the pre-release statement. So these include carbon footprint, carbon neutral, exit interview, first mover advantage, footfall, landfill, and solar panels. Okay. So together there are two, four, six, seven, seven terms that could show up as additional terminology. Now, whether or not they can be tested as a defined question, it is uncertain. It's more likely than not that they will not test these, but the fact that they've listed these as additional terminology would suggest that you, at the basic level, should understand, or have a good idea of what carbon footprint is. So, unlikely that they'll ask you to define carbon footprint or to define, let's say, carbon neutral, but you have to understand what it is because then that would help you with your application when you are writing your responses to support the point, the arguments that you write for your 2, 4, 6, and 10 marker questions in paper 1. Okay, so again, a key thing that really makes a difference between, I would say, a level 5 and a level 6 student is your ability to demonstrate application and very strong application, okay, in your responses. So footfall is one of those terminology that you might need to be familiar with, okay? So be familiar with what this means. Doesn't mean that you have to be able to, write a two-sentence definition, like the way how you need to define the term privately held, or maybe you need to define the term shareholder, for example. So it says that the greater the footfall, the greater the electricity generated. Each square meter tile is 6 centimeter thick, made from plastic, and can be customized. So one thing to point out here is that it is made from plastic. So something to sort of think about here is because it is made from plastic, does this create maybe perhaps sustainability concern? Okay. Because let's say in the event that these tiles don't work anymore in the future, right? Or let's say there's malfunctioning of these tiles for whatever reason, okay? Then are these tiles going to be disposed into the landfill, right? And if you go back to the additional terminology, you will see that the second last terminology in your case study, in your pre-release statement, rather, on the second page, you'll see that the second last additional terminology is landfill. So could it create sustainability concern in terms of, adding burden to landfills if the tiles don't work anymore? Okay. Obviously, the case study doesn't say this, but again, I'm re reading in between the lines and trying to think about, stretch your brain a little bit as you're thinking about this product that Nikita has designed, which is these kinetic energy floor tiles that, that's been designed, right? What could be the possible problem, right? And because if you're going to look at sustainability concerns, another thing to think about is you might want to draw reference to circular business model, okay, which is one of the BMTs that you should be familiar with, okay? And what I would really encourage you to do is make sure that you do try and study the circular business model. The reason for this is because that you might need to apply this, perhaps with the production process of these tiles, okay? Or perhaps, you might be asked on, how does Walkway Limited demonstrate that they are a sustainable company with reference to perhaps these circular business model, right? And for your reference, the circular business model is BMT 8, which you should have learned. Okay, and it is a standard level and higher level content. So again, it fits sort of the parameters of what can be tested for you in this paper 1 examination. All right. So it is a square, each square meter tile is 6 centimeter thick. It's made from plastic, and it says that it can be customized by color or pattern. Now, this is implying that perhaps because there is some sort of customization with it, are these tiles, okay, mass produced? Okay, again, think about, let's say, the context of a very large indoor area, for example, where you have to use these tiles and lay out the floor or the foundation of the floor with these tiles, probably need a lot, right? Each of these companies that maybe perhaps buys these tiles from Walkway Limited. So it is very likely that these tiles could be mass produced. So because Mass production, okay, which is a terminology within the operations management unit, unit 5.2, right? You might want to, again, go back to unit 5.2 and study this a little in terms of the definition again. You want to look at the pros and cons of mass production. But one more thing that I want to point out is that they mentioned that these tiles can be customized by color or pattern. So this raises another terminology or content that you have learned, which is mass customization, which is also within Unit 5.2. Okay, so this is another key terminology that you want to, again, study and make sure that you're able to understand the definition of it, the pros and cons of mass customization, and also maybe be able to distinguish between what mass production is and mass customization is. All right. It says that WW Walkway Limited, they produce tiles using the brand name Telec. Okay. So Telec is what they use, okay, using the brand name Telec. So this leads us to another thing that we need to understand is brand name leads to the whole idea behind branding. Okay. And branding is a subtopic within the product aspect of the 7Ps. Okay. So you're looking at the marketing mix, in other words. All right. So branding, we have to think about, perhaps the positioning of these tele tiles that Nikita has created and designed, and maybe perhaps to think about, how she needs to raise brand awareness in terms of that. Because after all, they are a relatively new business, so they need to think about, the challenges, okay, with raising brand awareness as a new business. Okay. Challenges with raising brand awareness as a new business. And also they need to think about the positioning of their tiles, okay, which then affects perhaps pricing decision. Again, we don't know too much right now, given the the short 200 words for the pre-release statement that we have here. But you could think about, perhaps that because Nikita is creating a sustainable product per se, right? Despite the fact it is made from plastic, that perhaps the positioning of her products could be relatively higher than regular tiles that are sold by, any other manufacturers, right? Because these are essentially connected kinetic energy tiles, which are a little bit more costly. And perhaps do some research, okay? See if you can find anything on on YouTube, okay? On kinetic energy tiles, so you have a better understanding conceptually on what this is and how this product works. All right, and maybe perhaps there are some real world examples of businesses that is actually engaged in the same line of business as Walkway Limited, where they do manufacture, design and manufacture and produce these kinetic energy tiles, right? Like Nikita does. Okay. So these tiles are branded under the brand called Telec. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And then it says that they are produced in small batches. Now, the fact that it's talking about batches, this would then lead us to, try and use another color. Okay, lead us to another type of operation methods that you might need to consider. Also part of topic 5.2. Okay, perhaps batch production. Okay. So again, I would suggest that you need to be able to define, okay, and look at the pros and cons of batch reduction, and maybe also be able to distinguish the difference between batch reduction alongside with perhaps mass customization or mass production, okay? Because it's still very unclear which operation method the business engages in. But from these, the words that we have right now in these 200 words, it could be mass production, it could be mass customization, it could be batch production, or it could be a combination of some of these, right? Because not all businesses will rely on only one method of operation or production method. Okay, they might have a combination of these ones. And then it says that they produce these tiles in a small factory in Country Rye. Now, what is important to think about is they're saying it's a small, okay, factory. So as a small factory, there's a couple things you need to think about. Okay, are they facing perhaps a capacity issue? Or would they run into a capacity issue? So what that means is, does a small factory, is it sufficient for them to take on orders, right? You'll notice that in the next page, okay? Just quickly, if you glance to this part or I think it's the fourth paragraph of your pre-release statement that WW actually has difficulties in meeting these production and the orders because there are more tiles that people want them to produce yet they don't have enough capacity to do so. So think about, in terms of a small factory, what are the challenges in terms of capacity issue? Think about in terms of a small factory, okay, perhaps there might be the need for some sort of workforce planning. So this is now touching upon the topic of HR Unit 2.1. Okay, how can Nikita, manage its small factory, and how, does Nikita hire these employees to work at their factory, right? Another thing you want to think about is given the nature of the work at a factory, it tends to be pretty mundane, tends to be pretty repetitive, right? So perhaps maybe you need to think about motivation levels of the factory workers. Okay. Again, I am being a little bit hypothetical here because there is not enough evidence from what we have seen so far about what could possibly be said in the remaining 800 words of this pre-release statement. But what you could think about is, let's say, if you are given additional information in the 800 words that starts talking about perhaps some HR issues, some motivation issues with the factory workers, right? Then it would be important for you to study the motivation theories because it would then help you to apply in a scenario. And just to point out, okay, because this is only an SL content focus paper, so that means when you're looking at the motivation theories, there's only three motivation theories that you need to learn at the SL level, and they are Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Taylor's scientific theory method, and also Herzberg's two-factor theory, which are the hygiene factors and also the motivators. Okay, so that should help you sort of narrow the scope in terms of what you need to study, which are the three motivation theories in the SL course. All right. And it says that Nikita is also the operations and finance manager. Okay. So what this could mean is that, maybe perhaps there is stress that she has to, look at because you know that she is the one that's designing the product, but she's also the one that's doing operations and finance, right? Now it's unclear if there's anyone that's also responsible for the marketing, okay, aspect of the company or the human resource aspect of the company. It's not mentioned again here. You might be given more information about that. So just be prepared, like I said, okay? The fact that Nikita is operating a relatively small factory, okay, in country Y, this could lead to some HR issues that you need to be aware of and make sure that you do have that prepared and studied for your upcoming paper one exam. All right. Let's take a look at this next paragraph. It says that initial sales in 2022, so that's 2 years into its company's operation, were to shopping malls. So if it's sold to shopping malls, this means that most of WW's clients are corporate, okay, clients. So they don't sell to individuals or households. Now, that also alludes us to perhaps the target market, which is obviously more marketing related, okay, of WW. Okay. Now, because they're only dependent on, let's say, shopping malls, then you might want to ask, are they too reliant on only one source of market of revenue from this target market of or market segment of shopping malls, right? Should they consider perhaps expanding, okay? Maybe expand to individuals and households. Again, we don't know, okay? We don't have information about this, but something to think about because as soon as you think about expansion, right? One thing that you want to make sure you remember is with expansion, okay, you might then apply and soft matrix because that's considered as growth. Okay, and soft matrix is one of the BMTs. You might want to look at growth methods. Because after all, for Walkway Limited, if they really want to expand their reach, okay, as they are building their brand awareness as a company, a small company, that in its early phase, it is important that they don't rely only on one market segment, but they really think about diversifying their revenue stream from perhaps other market segments. So then if one fails, then they could have, the other one to balance it out, right? Balance their risks. So something to think about because they're only looking at or selling to shopping malls. The tiles were used only for the main walkways and reduce the mall's electricity. Now, the fact that they were only used only for the main walkways, you might question why. Okay? Why not the whole mall, for example, right? So is there opportunities, okay, for using the tiles, okay, within the stores? So that means perhaps the shopping mall, they've laid out all of their walkways with, Nikita's telic tiles. But if you think about after you walk into a store at the shopping mall, right, within those, those tenants, okay, we call them, the store owners, okay, should they also, maybe use these tiles as well within their store? Okay, so that's something to think about. And then it says that a non-government organization, NGO, that focus on sustainability, okay, they've given, okay, WW an award. So the first thing here is obviously NGO. This is a type of, okay, business entity. Okay, specifically, it is a non-profit social enterprise. Okay. So you need to think about, perhaps the definition. Maybe you could be asked to define this. Okay, maybe you might be asked to describe what it is. Okay, maybe you'll be asked about the features, okay, of an NGO, and perhaps maybe the pros and cons. Okay, so again, ranging from the AO1 question to AO2 question that you might expect from this. And it says that it focused on sustainability. So the word sustainability comes back again, which reassures our previous speculation earlier where I talked about the plastic, okay, the use of plastic for their tiles, then perhaps circular business model is something that you need to be prepared for. Okay. And it says that WW got an award, okay, for doing this. So this could help with a couple of things. Okay, maybe the corporate social responsibility for WW. So that would be from Unit 1.3, Business Objective. Having an award could help with pricing. So perhaps can, you know, um, Walkway Limited exercise premium pricing on their Telec tiles? Something to think about as well, right? Again, we don't know, okay, but that might give you the evidence and premise on perhaps premium pricing might work for them, okay? But obviously, there's another thing, okay, the irony of using plastic, okay, versus sustainability. So is it really sustainable? Okay, okay. Will they get backlash, okay, from perhaps maybe pressure groups, okay, for doing this? And remember, going back to the second page of your pre-release statement, um, we have terms such as carbon footprint, carbon neutral, landfill, right? These are things that we need to think about. Is it true that perhaps these plastic tiles, if they don't work, they're not biodegradable and therefore they're actually not very sustainable, right? So again, this might be information that you could expect in the second half of this pre-release statement, the remaining 800 words. All right. Now, finally, let's take a look at the last bit of the pre-release statement. It says in 2023, WW received a large order of uh, 10,000 telec tiles. Okay. Now, with 10,000 telec tiles, okay, from a large, what is it? From a large and world famous shopping mall. So again, this goes back to what we said earlier. Are they too dependent on a single or narrowed, okay, market segment? Something to think about, something to think about in terms of does it limit their growth? Okay. And it certainly has because it says actually in this part of the case study, they received this large order, right, of 10,000 telic tiles, but they're unable to meet it. Okay, they're unable to meet this order. So that means they have, okay, a big issue that they have is production capacity issue. Okay. Now, production capacity issue will then reassure back to, and consistent with the information we're given in the first part, says that they actually produce their tiles in a very small factory in country Y. So something to think about is possibly in a 10 marker question, would you be given information about considering, okay, expanding or investing in a new or bigger factory? Okay. So this could be a possible 10 marker question that you might get. Again, I am being speculative, but something for you to think about. And how do you kind of prepare for this, right? Is you need to look at, for example, perhaps location analysis, okay, from unit 5. Okay. Unit 5.4, where you look at the qualitative and quantitative factors reproduction with finding a new location to help WW to basically produce more of their tiles in order to meet maybe forthcoming more orders that they might get, okay, from other shopping malls that might be interested in their tiles, right? Especially given the fact that they have won a sustainability award, right? That might entice more shopping malls to adopt this type of tile in their walkways, right? Now it says that they've actually outsourced, so outsourced with the terminology that you need to be able to define, okay? And they're outsourcing it to DV Choi. So as you're thinking about outsourcing, also think about the pros and cons with outsourcing. Think about also the consistency with quality, okay, that's being produced if they outsource to DVC, okay, DV Choi. Also think about perhaps, okay, being able to monitor the tiles produced, okay, and the challenges, right, with it. And then it says that WW provided DVC with the tiles design and material specifications. So DVC doesn't actually need to design it. They're being provided with the specifications. And the only thing that WW needs to do is they pay DVC $350 to manufacture each tile. Now, the fact that you're given some monetary amount, this would indicate that perhaps you need to do some cost revenue calculation, possibly. Okay. This might also suggest maybe perhaps you have to do some break-even quantity calculation. So for example, how much, okay, they need to produce in order to break even on, especially the fact that they are using an outside supplier or another company, DVC, to produce their products. Okay. And then WW charges the customer 700 each tile. So you can see that the profit margin, okay, per tile is simply 700 minus 350, okay, which is $350 per tile. So that's I would say a pretty significant margin, right? You're earning, almost double the amount. But obviously you do need to think about, how many of these does WW need to produce in order for them to break even. Okay. And then it does say that it is including shipping and installation. Now, the fact that it is including shipping, it means that, okay, the production, okay, is far from country Y, where they're currently at. So it's at country K. So during the delivery and distribution process, are there going to be delays, right? How might that affect WW's ability to meet these large orders? Let's say hypothetically, if DVC is unable to produce quick enough, or let's say if there are issues with their production process, right? Then that would obviously harm the brand reputation of WW. Okay. And then looking at the last sentence, it says that meanwhile, WW Small Factory in country Y continue to produce tiles to meet these small orders. So this small factory seems to be a problem, okay, for them. Okay. So again, might reassure us, maybe the guests, that perhaps you might get a 10 marker question on looking at, WW considering to expand their factory to another country. So then they're able to expand and also take on more orders. Now that we have a detailed look at the pre-release statement in the next couple of slides, I'd like to take a higher level look at how the 200-word pre-release statement can be connected to the 5 different business functions that you've learned throughout the whole business management course. These following slides will walk you through with some possible analysis with reference to the business functions, and hopefully it guides you in terms of how it helps you with the types of thinking you need to have as you plan out your revision schedule and to focus on the topics that may have a stronger relevance to the Walkway Limited case study. Because after all, these could actually become the possible questions that you might see on the day of your paper one examination. Okay, so let's start with unit one. Okay, what you can see is with unit one, we've listed a couple of things that are related to business strategy. So for example, the case study talks about a privately held company. So you might want to look at the benefits and costs for Walkway Limited in its operation as a privately held company. And also, like I said earlier, Nikita is an entrepreneur. So what are some challenges and also opportunities for her as Nikita begins the business, okay, as an entrepreneur, right? You could also look at, potential impacts of WW's ethical objectives as they receive the sustainability award from an NGO, right? Does that actually give them more opportunities or it actually lead to, more perhaps compliance issues, right? And also perhaps are they under greater scrutiny by perhaps external stakeholders, such as pressure group, okay? Um, as they are in the manufacturing sector, which is the secondary sector, it would be good to think about the economies and possible diseconomies of scale that may arise as a business that does produce these tiles. And perhaps also thinking about in terms of the BMTs such as SWOT and also steeple, so how these internal and external factors could actually provide opportunities and challenges for Walkway Limited. Okay. So this might be particularly more useful for maybe perhaps a 10 marker essay where you might want to think about, the strengths and weaknesses that you could then integrate into your discussion, or perhaps in, let's say, the remaining 800 words, you might be given some implications from the external environment that might have an impact on the decision making at Walkway Limited. And as you can see, we've created some exemplar questions that you can have a look at and try these questions out. Again, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know whether or not these questions are actually going to show up in the real IB exam, but these are our very strong guesses of what questions could show up based on the pre-release statement that we have, which is only 200 words, and also through the analysis that we've done just now on the 200-word pre-release statement, the possible other topics that the context could lead to. All right. One thing to also think about is question C, where this is a 10 marker question. Oops. You could look at this 10 marker question where looking at proposal for WW. Perhaps they're partnering with to supply its telic tiles to maybe other property developers. Because you might remember that as discussed earlier when we looked at the market segment and their target market, it seems to be only focused on shopping malls, right? Which are corporate clients, but again, it is a little bit risky for a business to only rely on just one narrow clientele because you're putting all eggs into one basket. So again, no crystal ball here, but perhaps maybe the additional information might allude to perhaps WW trying to explore other pathways for them to expand on their revenue stream by growing and targeting other customers that they might want to expand to, which if it is a corporate client, they might, consider maybe working with a large property developer and start installing these tiles within these new houses or new apartments that they decide to build and develop. Moving on to the second unit, which is human resource management, you'll see that you might look at the opportunities and challenges with respect to keeping employees motivated, especially when Nikita is operating a small factory plant. The whole idea behind the outsourcing to DVC is pretty much a big highlight in the pre-release statement. So that could actually lead to perhaps if Nikita continues to outsource production to DVC, would that have an implication on the staff morale the existing small factory plant. Would that mean that some employees could be made redundant because there's no need for them? And Nikita could get, DVC to do more of the production, and then perhaps, she would then refocus her business to focus more on perhaps the design side and the production side of things, all right? You could also look at perhaps the possible organizational changes to the business, especially when WW, okay, they're deciding to outsource to DVC. Okay, so these are some of the more HR related problems, issues that you might consider, especially because the case study itself so far has mentioned outsourcing. So outsourcing seems to be a pretty big theme that you do want to make sure that you study. And outsourcing is from Unit 5.4, which is location analysis. Okay, so make sure you do study that in preparation for this exam. And again, remember, paper one is strictly on the SL content, even though you're an HL student. Okay, you this helps you focus more on just the SL content that you need to prepare for this exam. Okay, and these are just possible exam questions, 2 markers and 4 markers that you can expect, and you can have a go at these questions, at your own time. In terms of Unit 3, we're looking at perhaps the financial implications of WW not being able to meet the large orders, okay, in both the short and long run, because it is clear that this is an issue right now for WW, and they are not able to meet these orders. So that means they have to outsource it to others. That means would that have an implication on their profit margin? And, in the past, they are able to take all of the profits themselves, but now part of this is now being used to pay to DVC, okay, to produce the tiles on their behalf. So that means perhaps their profitability might diminish. Again, we don't have these ratios. You could potentially be presented maybe these profitability ratios in the case study. Again, you don't need to calculate it because you're not given the formula sheet, right? But you might be given the results, okay, over a couple of years trend. So then you might need to be able to interpret it and also give some sort of financial assessment of what's happening with Walkway Limited, right? You might also look at possible access to sources of finance as a privately held company, because now that they have earned an award from an NGO, would that give them more access to sources of finance? Perhaps, could be some business angels who are more interested in, sustainability, right? And they might be interested in putting money into WW to help them expand and grow. You could also look at the challenges as a privately held company, how WW might have limited sources of finance, which I've mentioned earlier as well. And again, these are just practice questions that you can take a look at. So you could be asked to define cash flow. You might be asked to even do a calculation question on, say, the break-even quantity for selling their tiles at 700 per tile. Okay. Again, do expect that there could be some quantitative questions that will require you to do some simple calculations because you are permitted a calculator for this exam. All right. And marketing, in terms of the marketing unit, we have these different, holistic sort of high level aspects that you can take a look at. So perhaps WW might want to diversify their tile brand name, okay, to new market segment. As I said, they are very dependent on, selling their tiles currently to shopping malls, which could, you could argue that it is not very sustainable. They might want to explore other customer and client tells to make sure that they distribute their risks. And as they're thinking about distributing their products to other clientels and other customer segments, they might have to think about applying new distribution channels, right? Right now, they are looking at more of a business to business type of relationship where they are a secondary manufacturing company that is selling to a shopping mall, okay, who develops, their own shopping mall and build their shopping mall. But is there a possibility of doing a business to customer type of distribution channel where you have you have the Walkway Limited that is selling their tiles directly to customers, which could be, retail customers that are individuals or households that are interested in, laying these tiles in their house, okay, as an example. They might have to look at market research, right, to help them the market growth, okay, in the manufacturing of the telic tiles. They might have to think about the possible pricing and promotional methods that they need in order to distribute these tiles to perhaps new overseas markets, okay? Especially because now that they have outsourced their production to DV Choi, right? Does that also create an opportunity for them to build a brand name in another country, okay, where DV Choi is currently situated at. Okay, DV Choi is currently in country K, right? Whereas Walkway Limited is in country Y. So that's something to think about as well, okay, as you are looking at the marketing aspect of things. Okay, and again, a couple of exemplar questions to help guide you with your preparation. And finally, in the last unit, Unit 5, Operations Management, okay, you could take a look at engaging in a location analysis, which is quite relevant because they did say that their factory is small. Okay, given that the factory is small, maybe perhaps they need to expand. Okay, uh, so instead of being, a short-term solution where they have outsourced their production to DV Choi, maybe in the long term, they want to consider the investment into building a factory plant. Okay. That would then obviously entail looking at the qualitative and quantitative factors of a possible country that would be the best fit for WW. So that's why, Unit 5.4 is an important topic for you to look at and make sure that you're well prepared with the content knowledge, okay, going into the exam, knowing that you might be given more quantitative and qualitative information about this other country that they might want to expand to, okay, and this could potentially be a 10 marker question that you need to assess should they expand to a new country or not. You might be given additional cost information, okay, in on the day of the exam, okay, where you need to perform break-even calculation, which relates to the sale of their kinetic energy tiles, okay, especially with the outsourcing to DVC. And finally, our pre-release statement so far. It has mentioned a couple of times, batches, customization. So these words alludes to Unit 5.2, okay, which is operations method, where, you would have learned things such as mass production, mass customization, and also batch production. One thing I do want to point out is that mass customization, okay, this terminology and also this operation method, this is new, okay, on the syllabus. So in a past syllabus for the business management course, which was examined before 2024, mass customization was not a content that students need to learn, but it is new in your syllabus. And so far, since the May 2024 exam, I have not seen a question that has been asked on mass customization so far. So does that mean that there is a higher likelihood that this could be asked in your examination? Possibly. Okay. Is it a guarantee that it will be asked? I do not have a crystal ball, but I would suggest that make sure that you do spend some time to focus on mass customization, knowing that they did mention in the case study that their tiles could be customized in terms of colors and I believe patterns as well. All right. So again, just some practice questions that you can look at. And just going back to what I said about mass customization, here's one example question, question C, where you are being asked to explain one advantage and one disadvantage of WW's use of mass customization for its telic tiles. So just be prepared that you are able to, at the minimum, know the top of mind, the advantages and disadvantages of using mass customization. That would, at a minimum, get you the 2 marks out of the 4 marks. For a 4 marker question, and the other half of the question will rely on your ability to link it to the case study information, which hopefully in the additional 800 words that they give you on the day of the exam, you will have that information to help you do a further in-depth application of the advantage and the disadvantage that you explain for a question like this. And finally, on this page, okay, what we have just a very high level overview as well on WW as a kinetic energy tile manufacturer. So here we're just showing you, some of the key stakeholders that you might need to consider. This would be obviously important as you're thinking about the 10 marker essay, because the 10 marker essay, which is in section B, you will need to have a little bit more depth, okay, into understanding the implication of the business recommendation or decision that you're making in reference to, let's say, key stakeholders, the financial situation of Walkway Limited, okay, the types of customers and their current marketing mix, okay, and the sort of the key activities that they're engaged in. Okay, so what I would do is, if it helps, you can pause the video now to have a look at this in a little bit more detail, and maybe perhaps add this to your notes, okay, as you're preparing for your paper one examination. And moving on, you'll see that there are these potential additional key terminology that has been indicated on the second page of your pre-release statement for this year's November 2025 examination. You'll see that these terminologies are listed, but the IB doesn't expect you to be able to define it per se, but you need to have a good idea of what these terminologies are, because they can show up in the remaining 800 words of your paper one case study on Walkway Limited. So they include carbon footprint, carbon neutral, exit interview, first mover advantage, footfall, landfill, and solar panels. So what we've done on these two slides is we've given you sort of a high-level brief understanding of what it is, so a brief definition. And then in the second bullet point, you'll see that we try to link these to possible, case study context that could be related more to the Walkway Limited case study. So do pause the video if you wish to have a look at this to help you with your preparation for the examination. And we hope that this video was helpful for you as a November 2025 candidate writing the IB Business Management exam. We do understand that it is very stressful as you're preparing for these exams, and for many of you, business management is probably one of the first IB exam you'll be writing in the November exam schedule. So hopefully this video has given you some further insights and things for you to think about what you need to study and how to best prepare for your examination. Now, if you're looking for extra resources to prepare for your paper one examination, please do check out our mock exams on the Diplomaly website. We do have mock exams that are available that you can purchase. And for more practices with with both the practice question and also a full mark scheme with exemplar responses, that which you can see, how certain questions are being answered and the structure for these questions, so you have a better idea of what you could expect on the day of the real exam on October the 29th. And of course, if you want more personalized one-to-one support leading up to the IB exam, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Our email is info@diplomaly.org, or you can visit our website at www.diplomaly.org for our comprehensive collection of resources to help you get top marks in this course. If you found this video helpful, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching, and best of luck in your upcoming IB final exam.